Joshua? Thank you. Testing sound. Thank you. Yes, so just to repeat, transforming seemingly impossible into world shaping, that of course is basically the definition for being innovative. And I come from the humanities, so I felt extremely privileged to be asked to speak to these guys tonight. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that we're seeing in the world now, is that us literary humanity nerds can now speak to these insanely clever people on the other side that actually launch rockets into the sky. So that is one of the most wonderful changes that the pandemic has also brought, because communication, of course, is very important. But the first time that I connected to technology was when I played Pac-Man on my mom's IBM word processor. And now, a little less than 40 years later, technology is everywhere. Of course, you can make payments with it. You can hook up with it. And please don't lose your spontaneity when you hook up, you know. Swipe left with huge enthusiasm or risk. But of course, hooking up also means hooking up employers and employees. And like Aisha's company is doing, SweepSouth, which she'll explain to us in a moment. On that point, Aisha, what is the correct term to use for house cleaners at the moment? Is it still domestic workers?
So we use SweepSouth because all of the current terms we feel like are too steeped in exploitation, negative connotations. So there isn't really a great term to use. I suppose domestic worker is probably the most common. Definitely not maids.
No, definitely not. But SweepSouth is a very creative solution, don't you think? And it also, it's a fun way to play with your brand. But we'll get to that a bit later. And then, of course, what Mike's company is doing is they're still, like I said, launching rockets into space. That's what it looks like to me. He'll explain to us later on that they actually build sensors that they put on satellites that then go and I don't even know the words, feel the atmosphere to come and recreate the atmosphere on Earth. Something like that. You can give me a round of applause for that. But Mike will explain all of that to us a little bit later. But isn't it ironic that one always thought satellites don't actually feel like it's technological, because it doesn't feel digital. It feels quite old-fashioned. And you are going to tell us a very interesting story about how there's a shortage of people that's interested in what they're doing, even though the industry is growing very, very fast. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to stick to the informal tone of this conversation. Later on, we can get a bit more serious. But to reiterate what Joshua said about diverse backgrounds, it's a term that we hear often in South Africa, but then he spoke about biotechnology and payments instead of where you come from. So I know Aisha was in Botswana before she came to Cape Town, and just to give you an idea, Mike grew up in Kuilsrivier. So that's a good start, isn't it? So Kobus, where do you come from?
I come from Paarl, just around the corner, and then I studied here for a good decade or so. So, yeah.
You studied here for a decade?
Well, yes, I studied here for a decade. Also did a few other things, but yeah.
Yeah, he'll tell you a wonderful story about it, how he had to quit his job because he couldn't, otherwise he had to go on 3 months leave. Or give 3 months notice for leave, and then we wouldn't have had SnapScan.
That's about right.
So it's all about risking your decade at the university.
Look, I mean, I started off as a philosophy student, so I guess you always knew you were signing up for a few surprises along the way.
See, philosophy, and look where he's at now. Leànne, and you, where did you grow up?
Van hier, so in Stellenbosch af. Yeah, no, I grew up here, went to school here, went to university here. I actually studied here at this engineering faculty, but we didn't have all these fancy stuff at the time. And then after that, I jumped abroad for 11 years eventually.
Now, because a lot of you are quite young, all of you are young, don't worry. Let me just ask you this question, because I always find it interesting. What did you dream about as a teenager? And what sort of interest did you have that you are now still using as very successful entrepreneurs? Were you, for instance, a chess champion?
I actually was pretty good at chess. So my dad would, they'd play, like I don't think they do this anymore, but they'd have like chess in the park, and my dad would take me along, and I absolutely adored my dad and still do. And so I would want to do everything that he did. And so I actually did play chess, but I wasn't a chess champion. But when I was young, I dreamed about, nothing in particular, but I always had questions. I looked at things and I was like, how does that work? And random questions. Like, I would see the way that people behaved. Like, I remember asking my dad why people leave a little bit of coffee in the bottom when they drink it. And he said, why do you think? And I said, I think because when you put sugar into it, the sugar doesn't fully dissolve. And so the bottom is probably really sweet, and they probably leave the bottom because it's got a different concentration of sugar. And I was probably like 5 or 6, and my dad was like, that's a really good observation. So that's what I was like as a kid. I had lots of random thoughts about how the world works and how people work.
But then if you take a common thread through to SweepSouth, obviously it's human behavior, and that interests you. And I mean, on a sociological level as well. Absolutely.
So human behavior, I mean, my background is in human genetics, so, the questions became about sort of human biology and then SweepSouth absolutely about human behavior and how you can use technology to change human behavior and the connections between humans where in the past those connections have been pretty problematic. So how do you use technology as this sort of guerrilla way of entering households and trying to foster a different way of how those interactions work?
Your story is quite guerrilla-like. We'll get to that just now. Mike, you're very interested in classic cars, which I like also. I don't own a Triumph like you, but then I would have to make a career change. But maybe I can come and visit you. Do you think, I mean, I find it quite interesting that you're interested in classical cars and the design. Is there any link with that to what you do now with regards to satellites?
Yeah, I think that it's less about the design for me, more about the engineering. So I studied electronic engineering. My dad's a mechanical engineer. I studied electronic and then eventually realized I really like mechanics. So then I studied mechanical as well. And cars is basically a combination of those two things. So I love doing woodwork and I love working on the car. So, that's why I bought a Triumph. It breaks all the time and I can work on it all the time. Yeah, but it's an old car. It's an old rusty car that I bought from a guy in Langebaan. And yeah, working on the car is almost better than driving the car for me.
Yeah. Finding solutions to problems. Yeah. You use an acronym ADCS, right? So if you look that up, it can be anything from Army Dental Care System, Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff, which I think we might know, Australia Defence Canteens Service. How's that one? That's actually a real acronym. But of course, it is Attitude, Determination and Control System. Is that right? Okay, so explain to us what you do.
And we don't launch stuff into space. I wish that was what we did. Yeah, so it's attitude, in this case, is orientation. So it's orientation of the satellite. Determination, so measuring the orientation of the satellite, determining the orientation, and then controlling that orientation. So let's say a imaging satellite taking images of the Earth would have a camera on the one side of the satellite. And as it's coming over, so a satellite orbits every 90 minutes, it orbits the Earth. But while it's orbiting, the Earth is rotating. So you don't always get access to the same part of Earth every orbit. But when it comes over Cape Town and you want to, for instance, take a picture of Cape Town Stadium, the satellite, the main computer tells our system, I want to look at Cape Town Stadium. And then our system measures the Earth's magnetic field looks at where the sun is, looks at where the earth is, looks at the stars, and compares the pictures of the stars to maps that we have on board. And then from that determines where the satellite is pointing, and then generates our own magnetic field to interact with the Earth's magnetic field to rotate the satellite, and then point the Cape Town.
You've become very good at explaining it. I understood. I understood everything. Did you understand? Wow, that's quite amazing. Leànne, and you, did you have any hobbies as a teenager that you can pull through to Mintor now?
Yeah, way too many. I'm like your FOMO on steroids kind of person a little bit. So I just did everything in school that I didn't even have time for, all cultural stuff, sports stuff, and then all into academics, and then on the side things. And then my friends go on this model course, and I'm like, yes, I want to do it. And then I'm really bad at it. So then I go back to play with my friends in the street in the mud as well, and do all of that together. But I think behind that, there's a sense of curiosity that always was part of my life. And being just always want to experience something more and learn something more and do something more. And all those experiences, I think, are a really great mix for being an entrepreneur. Because at first, and maybe for a long while at the start, you have to be able to do a lot of stuff. And being a jack of all trades is not a bad thing in that situation. Those really helped me.
Interesting though, these days, not our generation, I'm a bit older, Kobus, our generation. We talk about young people, and we would easily say, yeah, they don't want to work anymore, they want to be CEO before they start working. Have you heard that before? So, do you also find that young people now want to be entrepreneurs before they actually know what they want to do?
I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, though. I mean, I absolutely wouldn't have done the stuff I did if I knew what it actually entailed before I started. So I think there's an enormous amount of value in being a bit naive and stupid, and having a space around you where it's okay to be a bit naive and stupid, and people who will catch you before you do irreparable harm. But yeah, I think that's an incredibly valuable thing, and I think it's incredibly healthy development that younger people today are not just paging through, as we did when we were kids, through the newspaper's job section to see what are the jobs out there and which one is the closest to what I feel like, but asking, what am I good at? Where can I make a difference? What are the opportunities? How do I create some kind of interesting avenue for spending my life on? I think that's a pretty good thing.
That's a great answer. And then what happened you were at the university, and how did SnapScan then evolve from there? Because it's an interesting short story, but you can just shortly tell us.
Yeah, so I mean, I spent, as I said, lots of time at the university. First studied here, then did a bunch of student politics stuff, sort of got sucked up into that, and then started lecturing. And then actually left to go do a project with Mixit, who was the big tech company in Stellenbosch at the time. And there's incredible energy that happens when you have a new industry like that very closely situated next to a university, where there are lots of really good people who are energetic and want to do stuff. So met a bunch of really cool people in that process. Lots of stuff happened on the way, and a bunch of friends decided, let's start a business. Where are the opportunities that we can do? And for us back then, it was a case of going, well, most business owners in South Africa don't have access to the formal economy. Banks don't want to bank them, they don't have the right papers, all kinds of stuff like that, can't give them credit card machines, so can we figure out a way for them to accept payments without necessarily having to be part of the formal economy as it was defined then?
Great. Aisha, I want to pick up on something that Kobus said. He said it's great to have that sort of startup next to a university. You also mentioned in another interview that South Africa's geographically has changed a little bit, in the sense that Cape Town is more technologically innovative than Johannesburg. Is that still the case?
The context of that interview was in terms of startup ecosystems, and I still definitely think that that's the case. I mean, when we started SweepSouth, and this was back in 2014, so I think Joburg has made a lot of progress since then. But in 2014, when we started SweepSouth, so I started the business with my husband, who is our CTO and is obviously my co-founder. And after 3-4 months of just the two of us at home every day, we were desperate desperate to find a broader ecosystem who we could speak to about startups. And so we tried to find that in Joburg, where we were at the time, and it was just absent. You know, I remember speaking to people, and they'd say, I'm running a startup, and we go, we're running a startup, and they'd say, what do you do? And we'd say, you know, we're building a platform that connects domestic workers and other home service providers, because we hadn't thought of the term SweepSouth yet, with customers. And they'd say, oh, I've got an e-commerce shop, and that's my startup. And so there was just this big disconnect in, you know, like, what are you actually doing when you're trying to build a tech-first, tech-centered business? So I still think that Cape Town is way ahead, and I think that universities, ecosystem players like this, accelerators, incubators, help to drive that. But I think there's also an incredible amount of energy in Joburg. I was talking a little bit earlier today about visiting Lagos. And I think Joburg has a lot of that, like, raw entrepreneurial hustle that that I think we could probably do with a bit of in Cape Town.
So you think there's opportunity there as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Mike, these ecosystems, it's quite interesting. I mentioned earlier that, of course, your industry is growing, but it's not as if you get applicants for your company. Just explain to the audience then how you would stimulate your ecosystem.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk is doing that for us. Yeah, everyone wants to work in a space company now. So, you know, there's a lot of interest. Everyone wants to work for the company, but we require very specialized skills. So that's the thing that makes it quite difficult. So we have a lot of eager people, but we don't necessarily have the right type of people to, you know, technically. So what we're trying to do is, you know, stimulate the university. And so we are starting to do, we started doing bursaries focused on satellite control systems. And so if you can't get the people from the industry, we're trying to build those, you know, build those skilled people. The difficulty in that is if you go and you invest all that money and that time and you train someone and they come and work for you for a year or 2 or 3, it's so easy for international guys to poach them, especially now with remote working. I mean, a US company can offer someone that works for me 50% more than I can, and it's still cheap for them, and they can work from here. So it is really difficult getting skilled people that's willing to work here for a South African salary in a tech company now. But we are trying our best to create the workforce instead of relying on it, because it's, you know, getting it from the industry, it's not going to happen. What we're also trying to do is also, that's part of the whole movement in the space industry at the moment, is they talk about old space and new space. And old space is what you said earlier. If you think about space or satellites, you think of old school technology. And it used to be that way because the old, bigger, chunkier stuff was more radiation hardened. So in space, our magnetic field protects us, but up there's a lot of radiation. So electronics die quickly. And the old electronics were more robust. So with the new space approach, we're using off-the-shelf electronics, the stuff that you have in your phone. But we do clever stuff to protect it. So it's got, yeah, that's where the IP and the tech and the stuff. But then also we're doing stuff differently. It's more of a mass manufacturing approach to satellites that typically used to be very skilled people building it, like highly trained engineers doing assembly. We have guys that are technicians that did let's say, studied for a year and then started working for us, trained up, that's now building the stuff that NASA is buying from us. You know, so we also, by changing the approach and taking more of a mass manufacturing approach and better processes, you can now give new people access to that market. You know, working in space, people that typically would never be able to work for a space company can now work for a space company. I think that's pretty exciting.
Very exciting, and I like the fact that you mentioned the poaching. It's a big problem. Leànne, that is something that you try and find solutions for. How do you do that?
Yeah. So, as you say, I think the right talent is so hard to get today for any type of business. And we all know everything is going around about universities and educational institutions that's not adequately preparing people for the real jobs in our very, very rapidly growing and new changing environments and in businesses. But I think so businesses obviously do what they can to get the right talent there from other companies, and then somebody just like poach theirs back again. But I think my big viewpoint on this is that businesses don't actually see people for their real potential. They want the final product. And they're quite often lazy to put in the effort to develop people into what their potential could pan out to be. And if companies really complain so much about the skills gap, and people don't, they're not ready, they've not been put through the right systems and educations, but they forget to notice what they actually have as proof and how that could develop into something. And if they can spot those talents and those opportunities, be more open-minded to it, they would have so many more amazing people as part of the companies.
How did Mintor come about?
Yes. Also through lots of, I think, really a combination of lots of personal experience. So myself, I came from the engineering background, and then I decided this is not what I want to do. And I went abroad and then landed in HR for a while, and then landed in ops management, and then went and did my MBA in social entrepreneurship. And that's when I started to come believe really that there is business-oriented solutions to the world's biggest social problems. And then after another stint working for the World Bank, I finally decided I want to come back to South Africa, and I want to work on stuff on people that I truly personally care about, people in our country. Plus, the problems we have in South Africa are so much more interesting than the problems abroad, where everything just is already working and people just try to make it better. And here we have really fundamental social issues, and we have the talent to be able to solve those. So yeah, I came abroad and I was playing around with some ideas. And I've always been passionate about youth development and the notion of helping people realize their potential. And so actually what spurred this was I was on the plane back and I was sitting next to a businessman, and he's like, I'm coming back from holiday, and he's like, okay, what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to start a business in South Africa. So what's the idea? So I don't really, I was going to say, I don't really know. It's like, okay, come up with something. It's going to be this matching platform that helps talent get connected to businesses, and it's going to work like this. And he said, great, send me your concept note. I might have investment for you. So, anyway, never anything came from that. But that actually was the thing that spurred my thoughts on what this now concretely could be. The intention from the start was going to be for Mintor to be a platform that supports young talent to prepare themselves better for work and gain access to those jobs. And later on, it actually also developed keep on supporting them while on the job to keep the jobs and grow in their career. So yeah, that's how it came about.
So Mike is giving bursaries, and you said you think that we are solution-driven as South Africans, and you want to give back, and you try to find a problem in the country and solve it. And then Kobus, you changed from SnapScan to HR with Radar. Was there also sort of a solution-driven, say, angle right from the beginning with regards to South Africa's dilemmas?
Yeah, so that was an interesting story. So we sold SnapScan to Standard Bank in 2016, and then obviously stayed on a little bit afterwards. But in that process, we were working with about 90,000 small businesses. And a few key patterns kept popping up every time. And one of the main ones were managing your people, getting good people, growing people, caring about people is probably one of those real leverage points in your business. It's a make or break in terms of whether you're going to be successful or not. And due to the kind of things that you spoke about earlier, where we're seeing a lot of small businesses who don't have the resources of a large company with structures and departments and people caring about stuff, but it's 3 or 4 people who have to look after everything themselves, we try to ask the question, are there ways in which we can support smaller businesses, and smaller in our cases up to 200 employees, maybe even a bit more in some cases, but to help automate processes that normally would require a HR department or a finance department. Because we don't think that managing people, and here we sort of clash with a bunch of our US competitors, we don't think that culturally in South Africa, in our experience, it works super well to manage people using a computer. South Africans are not that keen on that experience, but we definitely think that we can solve an enormous amount of the administrative processes, of the boring stuff that there's no reason a person is doing it. So that's really the opportunity we saw.
You're very funny and self-deprecating when you talk about the obstacles with regards to SnapScan. When you started Radar, you were older. Yes. Do you still find these obstacles as humorous, Or are they more difficult?
Look, so the one top tip I'll give anyone is please don't start a new business during a pandemic. It's really not advised. And it's harder doing it the second time around, or third time around, and it's definitely also harder doing it when you're older. I don't particularly enjoy sleeping on somebody else's kitchen floor anymore, and I do struggle with just going at it blind and not seeing the problems before they happen. So it is definitely more tricky, but on the other hand, you can also do a bunch of stuff that you couldn't do previously because you've built networks, you've had experiences, you can see problems much faster. I think maybe the most difficult thing of all the second time around is that when I started the business the first time, developers in South Africa were cheap as chips. You could get some incredible world-class talent working for incredibly competitive salaries. Those days are over. So it does mean that you have to ask yourself, I mean, to give you an example, in many of the cases, we've decided to not build technology to solve some repetitive problems, but to hire people because it's cheaper to do that than to build expensive systems. And that absolutely isn't a solution that would work in the US. But right here, right now, in our case, if we can create a few jobs and we can save cost in the process, that doesn't feel like a terrible trade-off.
Aisha, I'll ask you just now. I just wanted to ask Kobus, just because previously I gave the example of someone wanting to become an entrepreneur before actually knowing what it entails. So perhaps just share with the audience your take on the Silicon Valley romanticism and how different that is to South Africa with regards to us needing money to survive.
Yo, look, I mean, I'm probably old and bitter now, so take this with a massive spoon of salt. I think it's, for me, the conclusion has been, it is incredibly important to just be very honest about what game you're busy playing. If you're building a business in South Africa, take cognizance of that fact, use the incredible opportunities that we have, but set up your business to make sense here. It's not the same as walking down Sandal Road with a basket and people throwing money into it. It is a different setup. That doesn't mean it's bad, but it does mean you need to tackle it in a different way. And if you want to play that game, then decide you're playing that game and double down on it. I mean, if you're going to play a big, expansive international game, you can do it from here. There are great success stories to do it. And in some cases, it means you may need to move somewhere else to do it more efficiently, and that's fine too. But I think maybe for me, the most important learning was that businesses are unique, people are unique, and you need to figure out what's fit for purpose. I mean, if I look at myself, I don't have the appetite for building a billion-dollar business. I thought I had it a decade ago, but I'm no longer in that space where I find that the most interesting challenge. But I absolutely think there are people for whom that is a fantastic challenge, and they should pursue that. But I think there are different options, and you need to figure out what makes sense for your team and your opportunity.
Thank you. Kobus now spoke about the pandemic. Of course, we can't ignore it. And I really want to hear, so I'm going to ask you 3 questions. First, you used your own money to start your company. You wanted to go on holiday, and there was a problem with a domestic worker. So before we carry on, I just want to know, did you ever go on that holiday?
We did, but it took us 6 weeks to find someone to stand in for our nanny.
But then you went on holiday. It was your last holiday ever.
Yeah,
in your
but
life.
we'd already, yes,
Yeah.
and we'd also already had the issue which led to us starting SweepSouth, so we spent the holiday building SweepSouth. So
You
it
see,
wasn't really a
yeah.
holiday. Yeah.
So then the story of SweepSouth is fantastic, and I want you to go and look at it on the internet. It's a long story. But, of course, you've got, it's a story where you are really tackling a very big problem in South Africa. You were quite surprised by what you found when you started doing research. So please tell us a little bit about that, but then also tell us what happened in the pandemic. That must have been one hell of a crisis for you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so the sort of backstory to SweepSouth is that through that search of trying to find someone to help us while our nanny was away on holiday, we spent a very long time trying to interview a whole lot of different people who either weren't available or weren't suitable, or the background checks didn't check out. And when we started interviewing people, the feedback that we got was that I'm being paid very badly. The experiences are horrible. because I'm working with people who are exploitative, who are racist, who, you know, to have the assumption that when I come into your house, I'm casing the joint to try and steal something. And that basically this was an industry that hadn't really progressed much, had sort of been on standstill from, you know, 1994 and even before that to when we built SweepSouth in 2014. And so that experience was what led us to then spend our holiday trying to build a solution to what we found. And it was great, and then COVID. And yeah, the experience of trying to grow a business that is a person-to-person business that is centered around connections between people offline, so we're an online to offline business, and then trying to run that in the middle of a pandemic that is spread by people interacting with each other was pretty horrendous. So last year, June, July, really, really difficult, or April, May, really difficult, lockdown. We went from sort of trying to figure out, like, what is this thing and what's the impact going to be on South Africans in late January, early February, where we started seeing news of this, you know, Chinese virus. And then suddenly, 2 months later, South Africa going into like a super strict lockdown. So it was really, really difficult. And we had to think very innovatively about how we get the business through this. I think it was the first time, like, running a business is extremely difficult. And, like, you know, what you say about sort of being naive, if I knew what would go behind it, I would have stayed in research and never, ever have started this business. Obviously, in hindsight, I'm very happy now. But you know, we had to suddenly go, there's an existential crisis that our business is facing. Like, if we have a 6-month lockdown, we don't have a business. And so, yeah, there were a couple of things that we did, and I'm like super, super proud of our team, and keen to also just talk a little bit about sort of how you get the right people on board, because I think mission and bringing people around the idea of why you do what you do was so important for us during that time. I remember we went out somewhere, and we were driving back into our road, and we went like, should we just shut the whole thing down? Like, there's going to be lockdown in a few days. Maybe we should just throw in the towel. Instead of having people hoping that we're going to come up with a solution. And Alan said to me, there are literally 5,000 people that depend on us to you know, make a plan and make it work. And so I think mission is also super important, both for bringing the right people on board, but also retaining them when you're going through a crisis, when you've got another company who's got very competitive salaries, etc. But yeah, the way that we got through it was thinking innovatively. So how do we quickly build a solution to getting through this? We made some really fast, as in 2-day platform updates that meant that everyone who paused or cancelled bookings because of lockdown could continue to contribute to their sweep star. So we had, in the early days, 60 to 70% of customers contributing in some way, which was amazing. I think just such an awesome testament to SweepSouth customers and how much they care about the people who work in their homes. And then also had to think about priorities and sort of, we're kind of probably pushed a little bit preemptively into a outside of South Africa strategy, because the question then became, there are likely to be lockdowns at different times in different countries, so we better get into different countries quickly to try and mitigate risk. But yeah, an extremely, extremely difficult time. A lot of personal learning as not just an entrepreneur, I think as a person. Like, it was probably one of the most difficult times I've been through in my life. And I have 3 kids and have done a PhD and concurrently a business degree. And lockdown was probably the most difficult thing I've ever experienced.
Wow, I'm so glad you guys made it. And but I find it very interesting that you were thinking of other countries, but I think we have to talk about that over a drink afterwards. Don't you find it interesting with domestic workers in other countries? As a researcher, you must find it interesting. We do, and we publish annual reports that look at domestic workers' living, earning conditions in South Africa versus other countries. And we think, I mean, we're doing a lot better in South Africa, in short, than other countries. Interesting. Leànne, the unemployment rate is soaring. How did that affect your business?
Yes. So before COVID, we were solely working in an entry-level recruitment space. And actually at the time also, Mintor started operating as kind of a hybrid between a recruitment agency and a job site. But we incubated our own technology. And so 3 years ago, we started developing our own chat-based technology, and there's actually a bigger story around that. But for the reason that, and it was just amazing that we already started doing it 3 years ago, because it's a super long learning curve, and we were one of the first entities that all using chatbots in that nature. But we just realized that if we want to help the majority of the unemployed youth, we have to meet them where they are at. And the place where they're most connected in the world is their WhatsApp chats. So they can't get computers, they don't have money for heavy data, all of that, but everyone have their WhatsApp bundle, or at least if you don't, you have a mother or a father or somebody who does. So we built our chatbots that automated the job seeker support and the recruitment system on WhatsApp, and we use it for our own internal purposes. So COVID struck, and all our clients ended their contracts and stopped recruiting. And we were like, oh, okay, I hope it's only 3 weeks. Okay, then it became like 3 months, and what now? So your business completely stopped for us. And we realized actually entry level is going to be one of the last things that businesses are going to actually pay attention to again when they do get budget. So it was a big setback moment for us, time. And then the realization was just like looking back and looking at the assets that are, and the competencies that are in your hand. What do we already have, and what else could we do with that, and where is there a need for that? And so we realized that we have a very good mechanism of quickly building chatbots on WhatsApp. It can be on any chat app, but obviously WhatsApp for South Africa. And then secondly, we have very good know-how expertise given over almost like 7 million messages in a couple of years of how to communicate with this audience out there, generally not English as first language, generally coming from a low literacy level. And so we realized also that most of the people, even when they do get jobs that we focused on previously, still sit in the same circumstances at home. They don't have computers, still they don't. They don't normally work on computer-based jobs, so they don't have proper access to support in the work environment. So we built a whole series of chatbots for HR support for businesses who employ large volumes of people that are not office-based and typically come from those environments. And so those include issuing of pay slips on WhatsApp, managing leave requests, doing training, all training fully facilitated on WhatsApp automatically, doing the recruitment through WhatsApp, and then employee support. And so actually it spurred us to open up our minds for a whole new industry out there with a much bigger need than we even were focusing on before. So I'm extremely grateful for COVID that nudged us in that direction.
It's very inspiring. Mike, you said to me prior that you would like to stay in South Africa. Why?
I don't know. I like the weather. I don't know. There's so much I appreciate about South Africa. For work, I've had the absolute privilege to travel a lot for conferences. So that's one of our biggest sales channels, is we travel to trade shows and we go show our components and speak to people and build network. And I've seen many different countries in terms of landscape and cities and those type of things, and I've met many different people of different cultures and got to know them through spending a week or two there. And I just love South Africans. I love South Africans. I love the country. I like the food. I like the weather. I think we have amazing opportunities here. I think the standard of living that we can have in South Africa compared to other countries is extremely high. You know, you might earn double the salary in America, but I don't know, you can't do the things that you can do here. We've got so much freedom. I just love the mindset. One of the things in COVID, when we had there was the riots in Durban, right? It was in Durban, right? Yeah. During that time, one thing that I realized was as soon as it got bad, the communities kind of banded together and they just solved the problem immediately. And I just love that. So there's a lot of divide and a lot of problems in South Africa, but I think when it gets serious and when we're like back against the wall, then we band together, like no questions asked. Then we unite, and I really love that.
Stellenbosch unite. So with regards to your team, are you still the same team that you were when CubeSpace started?
The core team, yes. We've lost like 1 or 2 guys and then got them back and lost them again, unfortunately. But the core team is still the same. But I mean, when we started, we were 3 or 4 or 5 guys trying to figure out what the hell we're doing. And yeah, slowly, got the first, so our first employee actually in the company, we were still operating from within the university in the beginning. So we were employed by the university and we were like starting to sell the stuff from there. But our first employee was actually Marcel, our office admin lady. And yeah, she's still with us. And I mean, she constantly says she wants to be an old lady at our company. And I mean, I just love that. Those Seville, our one technician, I think he was probably employee number 3 or 4. So I just went on Indeed. I think at that point I found this guy. I interviewed him in Cape Town. He stayed in Kailicha at that time. He was busy. He did a diploma and he wanted to do a BTech. But he came for an interview here eventually, and as he walked in, he kind of corrected the carpet that was flipped over, and something fell over the table at some point, and he caught it. I was just like, this guy's skills, he's got great attention to detail. He's got skills, and I just hired him, and then he started building stuff, and we trained him how to solder, and he started building his skills, and he studied part-time, so we did his BTech, and now he's going to start, he just finished that, now he's going to start his MTech. So we kind of also try and give guys freedom to study and give them days off for studying and that kind of stuff. But I mean, I know Sevilla is going to work for us for forever. I had a conversation with him the other day, and I mean, there's no performance review with him. It's just thanking him for working hard and him saying, thank you for providing me a job and training me. So yeah, those are the things that are really special. Yeah.
Lovely stories. When your industry now finally grows, you're going to have to find Kobus, but not yet. So let's quickly talk money. Leànne, you said on the airplane that you didn't get that investment. Mike said that he was at the university. Kobus was also at the university. You used your own money. The university is quite a comfortable place to start off from, but then when you leave, what happens, and what are your thoughts around investment?
The thing that took me quite a long time to figure out was just how much of a difference it makes having a bit of a safety net. And I think that's probably the biggest unfair advantage that you get. So, I mean, we started off, at least on the SnapScan side, with no external funding and our own money. But I still knew that if everything went completely up in flames and I was unemployed, I had a number of couches I could go sleep on. I had a family who would probably feed me. And that's really not the case for everyone, right? So if you have that layer, you can take risk. That's also why if you start off with a lot of money, taking risk is a lot easier, right? So I didn't have that, but at least I had that sort of first step or two on Maslow's hierarchy of needs was met. So I think that makes it really an unfair advantage, and one that one should leverage as much as possible. I don't know, like this time around we took some funding, probably take more funding down the line, but I think you need to just figure out why you're doing it. If you can usefully employ funding, then it's an amazing thing to speed things up. But I also don't think that if you can't get funding, it's impossible to build a business. It's just a different shape of business. But I think use the stuff that's around you. I mean, for us, the first time around, what was really useful was the networks, the support, the good people that you know, the friends who you can ask for favors who are willing to work over weekends to help you build something. That is a real advantage.
Not scared to ask. Leànne?
Yeah, so I think to add Kobus, I think actually, yeah, if you don't have funding, actually sometimes it's a blessing in disguise because you're really forced to figure out how you're going to do this without money and you only focus on what really matters. Otherwise, you try a lot of stuff because you have the luxury to do so. Yeah, so for me, for the business, I was fortunate also to have had a safety net. I came from a very good job beforehand and a good savings, and that allowed me in dollars as well. So it allowed me to, for the first 3 years, live off my savings, building the business. And I could spend every little cash we got into employees and other things that mattered. But I also think, and that's again a personal approach, but I think delaying investment as long as you can is also good. you're actually really forced to do your MVPs in terms of MVP before you build it and push it out onto the market. And we've had investment offers a few times before, but we decided not to take it. Well, time was not right. And I'm so glad we didn't, because we would have scaled the wrong thing. Because we've twice in Mintor's lifetime significantly pivoted, and we would have been in the wrong market, invested and in the wrong market if we had that money pushed us into that direction. But the flip side from it is you definitely can scale much quicker if you do have support like that with you. Yeah.
Mike?
Yeah, it was, for us, it was just really hard work from when we left from the university. So obviously the foundation we had was all the technology at the university. We didn't get money from the university, we got technology from the university. So it was, I mean, our company is built on technology history from the 80s and know-how from the 80s, and then masters starting in 2000, you know, probably 20 or 30 masters and, you know, PhDs that were done, not specifically in exactly what we use, but know-how and just tech. And the fact that we could start there with that technology at the university gave us the springboard for sure to be able to do what we needed to do. But then after that, we just worked really, really, really hard. So we had this corner office, and then we kind of grew, you took the next one and the next one. But I mean, I slept in that corner office probably 30 to 50 times in my life, I don't know. So yeah, we just worked really hard, and we took small salaries and we just like bootstrapped it. But we, for 3 or 4 years, we took very small salaries and like slowly scaled it and really just hustled. Yeah, so we never took funding, and I'm really glad we didn't. Things change. So, you know, as you said earlier as well, your approach must be, it's dependent on the industry, it's dependent on the product, but it's also dependent on the time of your business. You know, there comes a time where scaling might, or taking funding to scale might be a better option. But it's, yeah, I mean, I don't think even the most successful entrepreneur can come to you and say it's an easy, or it's a logical, easy, predictable thing. It's always very particular to the situation, and it's always very tough to know what to do. And most of the time, you know, going one way or the other both could work. You know, it just really depends.
Are there any questions from the audience?
My question is for Aisha. I have an online marketplace for weddings and events. I just want to ask, how did you decide what to focus on? Did you focus on building your supply first, and then that grew your demand? Or how did you decide what to focus on when you were starting up?
It's a super good question, because it's always the challenge with marketplaces is trying to figure out like the chicken and egg between supply and demand. And I think you have to think about your industry and where in your industry and in your market are you constrained. And that's always going to be where you'll have to spend a little bit more attention. And once you have budget, a little bit more marketing. So, it really depends. If you constrained on the supply side and it's, you know, the vendors of the wedding stuff, then focus on getting them together first. And if you know that if you've got really good, like what if you have really good of, will the other people come? So in SweepSouth's case, we knew that we need, when we start off, a few really good sweep stars, and then we need to get customers. And if those customers are ordering through the platform, then it'll be really easy to get more sweep stars, but we've got to probably invest more and pay more attention to the customer side. So it depends on the business, but just thinking about like where are we constrained and who's going to be harder to attract, and who, if we attract them, will you have that sort of, they call it the virtuous circle.
More questions?
Hello, everyone. My question is based on Aisha. So me and my team, we are trying to start a business that connects street vendors directly to small to medium scale farmers. So I will presume that you have a problem like us. How do you get those people who are technologically disadvantaged into using an app such as SweepSouth, as we would use on our app called Basket?
Another good question. It's also cool to see that so many people are building marketplaces, because I think if you're able to crack both sides of a marketplace, you're adding dual value as opposed to just sort of one way. So that's really cool. That was a big challenge for us in the beginning, as well as just smartphone penetration. So not just digital literacy, but actually like do enough people have access to smartphones. And in the beginning, it was just very intensive sitting down and working people through, sorry, this sounds a bit bad, working through people through the platform, trying to get them to understand it and listening intimately to the feedback that you get, and then using that to iterate on whatever it is that you've built. So instead of just sort of building this thing and going, here's our product, you use it and you might struggle to use it, going, here's what we think it might look like, please give us feedback in terms of, does this make sense to you? You know, if I position this way, is it clear or unclear? Like a lot of UX testing on the provider side. But it was very intensive. We spent hours and hours and hours on the couch and in the car with SweepStars in the early days, asking them about their experience using the platform. And going simple, not also assuming that the platform that works for the customer and the platform that works for the service provider are the same. Our two platforms are completely different. We've built something for purpose with service providers. It's low on data, very simple to understand. Usability is super simple. It's based on other apps that you might have used. So we think about WhatsApp and Facebook as apps when we think about how that works. And then the customer side is completely different based on their experiences.
Yeah, Leànne, that would have been your answer as well, because that's what you said about the WhatsApps just now. Any more questions?
My question is for Mike, specifically regarding supply chain. So I assume, you know, with the products that you're selling is very sophisticated, the electronics and components that go in there. Are you currently struggling at all to get components, especially now with the silicon shortage? And if so, how are you mitigating, you know, that supply risk?
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and especially because some of the components we're using now has become super popular and everyone's using it. Yep, we suddenly realized, we thought about it a long time ago. We thought it might become a problem. We said we're going to do something about it, and we never did something about it. And then suddenly it hit us. And then we did what everyone's doing, which is causing the problem. We bulk bought. So we bought enough stuff so that we can build for the next, you know, until the end of next year. We've got a lot of stuff now. But some of it we got really lucky. Like one of the, we're going through a process of redesigning our complete system. We're building a Generation 2 system. And in this system, there's like one chip that's super critical. And that's the chip we didn't have stock of. We only, I don't know, because it was R&D, we weren't sure it was going to be the right chip. So we haven't bulk bought yet. And then we placed this order for this chip. And then suddenly it showed the lead time is now not 3 weeks, it's now a year. And then we panicked, and then we decided, okay, we need to buy a different footprint of that chip. And so not one with leads, like a QFN packet. Oh, no, you said no abbreviations. Like a tiny packet. Yeah, so we just ordered those. And then we were like, okay, well, this is the only option, but it means we need to redesign all of our boards. So it's a massive amount of R&D we need to redo. And then a week later, of that original order, 100 chips just rocked up at our door. No jokes. Like, it was all suppliers, nowhere had any stock. And it just like an old order that said it was cancelled. We just got 100 chips. And that's just, yeah, that's going to carry us throughout the next year or two. So it saved us probably yeah, I don't know. I can't even estimate the amount of man hours that would have had to go into the redesign we were saved. But yes, so there is a major problem, but we're luckily got hold of a lot of chips. But if we were 2 weeks later, we would have been a bit screwed. Yeah.
Specifically around the footprints, as you say, you scour through all of this and see which ones you can find. Okay, we've got that one. Okay, we can try and use that one.
And it's scary that, like, as we started looking at alternative chips, those alternatives also started selling out because everyone was doing exactly the same thing. But yeah, at the moment, there's just no chips of many things. I mean, if you want to go buy a graphics card for your computer at the moment, you'll see the shops are empty. It's a big problem.
My question is for Kobus and Mike. For me, there's two types of problems. There's simple problems and there's complex problems. So both of you came from a university solving complex problems, but also that creates bigger opportunity. But what I would like to know is, how did you go about coming from a very technical point of view to making it simple, creating a simple product from a very technical starting point? First of all, how long did that take you to develop a simple solution, explaining in 10 seconds, where you really know you've got a really complex problem?
So, I mean, I think the answer is that you don't really design those solutions up front. You sort of discover them. So we could identify, I mean, if I can just quickly tell you about the SnapScan side. So there we thought originally what we were doing was building a way for people to buy stuff online, because back when we started in 2011, it was really hard buying stuff online. So we had an app that saved your credit card so you can reduce shopping cart abandonment. I mean, that's where the product started. And we ended up essentially doing mobile payments in the real world. I remember so clearly, we were sitting in Data Voice House in Technopark, and we had a whiteboard writing down all the things we all promise each other we will never do in this product, right? We will not do physical payments. We will never do a double-sided marketplace. We will never do a product that has a low volume transaction fee in it. It is essentially a perfect design for where we ended up 4 years later and what we did. So, I don't know, I think one of the things that also really intrigued me is that interface between systems and people. And I think that's where the simplicity comes. Exactly as Aisha said now, from the outside it may look incredibly simple, but what you're doing is you're presenting a very complex set of solutions to people in a way that they can get a grip on. I mean, when we were starting off on the SnapScan stuff, the hardest part was explaining to people that if you buy something online, you're not going to get defrauded. Today, buying something online is completely normal for everyone. So the world just moves along. But initially, I mean, it meant we had 3 devs and myself trying to give away free coffees at a farmer's market at Route 44. You know, that was the strategy of telling people, and they look in your face and they go, oh, I know somebody that looks like this. He's probably not trying to steal my credit card, so I'll sort of trust him to add it to my phone and get it going. But yeah, I think it is about not necessarily reducing the complexity, but packaging it in a way that becomes accessible to people.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm going to, is that settled? Bye-bye, Donkey. Thank you so much. Did you notice that my English actually improved during the whole interview? It's also my first event in a very long time. So it can only go better, and I will never say that you launch things into space again, Mike.
Actually, please keep saying that.
Okay. We'll watch your career. Okay, Kobus Ehlers, Radar, Leànne Viviers, Mintor, Mike-Alec Kearney, CubeSpace, in Aisha Pandor, SweepSouth. Please speak to them afterwards. Get yourself a glass of wine. Thank you so much, Stellenbosch Network. Thank you, Innovus. Their banner is also up there. And then LaunchLab, of course. Dankie, Hanley. And we are very pleased to also be part of the Innovation Summit. Thank you, Joshua, for having us. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hanley, for organizing. Thank you.